Welcome to Relax Academy. We help you prepare for ECZ exam to enjoy your learning with us. Thank you.
Welcome to this lesson in biology, which is Introduction to Biology. So, what is biology? That is where we want to start from. Okay, so the word biology was first used by a German naturalist by the name of Carl Friedrich Badock in 1800s. Okay, so it was popularized by a French naturalist in 1802. Now, the word biology comes from the two Greek words, which are bios and logos, where means life and logos means study, science, or knowledge. Okay, then, still the question remains, what is biology? How can we then define biology if bio means life and logos means study, science, or knowledge? Then biology can therefore be defined as scientific study of living organisms and their interactions with the environment. It is simply the scientific study of living organisms and their interactions with the environment. Well then, this leads us to understand what an organism is, since it is the scientific study of organisms or living organisms. What are organisms? Organisms, these are simply things that have got life in them or living things. So an organism is just a living thing. An organism is a living thing. Okay, let us now look at the characteristics of organisms or living things. How can we tell something has got life or something lives or it doesn't live? How can we differentiate what between the living things and the non-living things? Well, to begin with, like I said, the characteristics, these are simply features, elements, or components that help us to describe something. So now, if we want to differentiate between a living thing and a non-living thing, here are some of the characteristics that we can use. So we use a mnemonic called the Mr. Graphic. Mr. Graphic. So this mnemonic is going to help us how to differentiate living things from non-living things. So a living thing must have all these characteristics. All these characteristics, none of these characteristics should be missing. If one is missing, then it is not a living thing. So, when we're talking of living things, we have animals, plants, bacteria, fungus, and so many other things that are falling under categories of living things. Well, under Mr. Graphic, we will start with this letter M. This letter M stands for movement. This letter M stands for movement, and then this R stands for reproduction. Reproduction. And then this G stands for growth. Growth. And then we have this R, which stands for respiration. Respiration. And then we have E, which stands for excretion. Excretion. That is excretion. Then we have F, which stands for feeding or nutrition. Feeding or nutrition. Then we also have this letter I, which stands for irritability or sensitivity. Irritability or sensitivity. And then we have the last characteristic, which is a C, which stands for cells. That one stands for cells. So these are the 8 characteristics of living things or organisms. Without these, then we would categorize that thing as a non-living thing. Of course, that is an inorganism. All right, so we proceed to the next part where we're going to look at now these 8 characteristics in detail. So we'll start with movement and we'll present it here. Movement. So what is movement? Well, movement is simply the process by which a living thing changes its position and posture without external help. Now, one would wonder, does a plant move? Certainly it does. Now, I need to clarify that movement is different from locomotion, because locomotion is changing position completely from one location to another, and locomotion is done by animals only. But movement, both animals and plants do move, and if one of those doesn't move, it means that it is not a living thing. How do plants move? Plants, they move as they respond to stimuli. For example, if the sun has grown in the sun, it will bend towards the position where there is availability of the sunlight. Again, if a plant grows in a place where there are rocky, it's a rocky area, the roots would turn and respond to the area where there is water or the presence of water. And that is what requires movement. All right, so we move on to the next characteristic, and that is none other than reproduction. What is reproduction? Reproduction is the process by which organisms produce their young ones. The process by which organisms or organism produces their young ones. Produce their young ones. Well, we proceed to the next part, which is growth. Growth. This is another characteristic of living things. So if a living thing can't reproduce, then it is not a living thing. That is what now brings about the debate of a virus. Is a virus a living thing or a non-living thing? Well, we'll see later on as we move on in our lesson. Growth. What is growth? Growth is simply the permanent increase in size, number of cells, and also the complexity of an organism. This is the permanent increase in size, mass, number of cells, and complexity of an organism. When you talk of complexity, we're talking of something that is bigger, composed of many other things. Well, we move to another characteristic, which is respiration, as we have seen from Mr. Graphic. What is respiration? Respiration, again, is a process by which organisms release energy from food substances inside living cells. It is the release of energy from food substances inside living things. Well, we move on to the next one, and that is the excretion. What is excretion? Well, excretion is the removal of toxic metabolic waste from the cells of the body. Now, what is metabolism? Or what is metabolic reaction? Well, if we look at what metabolism is, this is simply, metabolism is the total chemical reactions that takes place inside the living cell. Inside the living cell. So all the reactions that take place inside a living cell, as long as that is a chemical reaction that takes place, in the release of energy, in the release of carbon dioxide, the oxygen, all those reactions that take place in the cell, that is what we refer to as metabolism. That is what we refer to as metabolism. We proceed to the next part, which is types of metabolism. How many types of metabolism do we have? We have 2 types of metabolisms. What are these? There's anabolic reaction and the catabolic reaction. So anabolic reaction, that's the spelling there, and catabolic reaction. Let's look at this in details. What is anabolism? Anabolisms or anabolic reaction are metabolic reactions where large and complex molecules are synthesized, e.g. photosynthesis. So meaning from smaller molecules, when smaller molecules join together to form a larger and complex substance. That is what we call as anabolic reaction. What about catabolic reaction? It is the opposite of anabolic, meaning it involves the breakdown of large molecules into smaller molecules. So catabolic reactions, as you can see there, are metabolic reactions where large and complex molecules are broken. This time is breaking, not building. Breaking down to simpler molecules, e.g. respiration is an example of catabolic reaction, while photosynthesis is an example of anabolic reaction. We move on to the next part, where we continue now with the characteristics of living things. And we will start this time around, we'll start with the feeding as we are continuing. So, feeding. What is feeding? Of course, feeding is the process by which living organisms obtain food. It's a process by which living things obtain food. Irritability. What is irritability? Well, irritability, which we also said is sensitivity. So irritability, this is the ability to detect and respond to stimuli. To detect and respond to stimuli. That is what we call as irritability or sensitivity. Just like when you feel hungry, you respond to hunger by finding food and eat. When you sense some heat on your skin, you respond by moving out. When you feel cold, you respond by putting a winter coat to warm your body. And that is what we call as irritability. Remember we said irritability is the same as sensitivity. What is stimulus? Stimulus is any change in the environment which causes a response from an organism. It is simply any change in the environment which causes a response from an organism. All right, we move on. Cells. What are cells? And this is the last part of our lesson today, which is characteristics of organisms or living things. What are cells? Cells, these are functional units of living things or organisms. We can also define this as the basic units of life or the basic units of organisms. Thank you very much for watching. This is Lux Academy. We invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel and join our team. This has been your teacher, Mr. Ampande. Thank you. See you again in the next topic, cells. Shalom, shalom.